Yeah, thanks very much, Luke. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so I've been having a look at the chat box, and as you say, we've only got a few minutes, so I'll not talk very much, and I've tried to summarize and bring together a few of the different questions because we've um, various questions have picked up on some similar themes. So one of the things I noticed from questions that were posted by a few different people, Sarah, Mark, Giselle, Barbara, all asked questions that I thought touched on problems of I understand a lot of barriers to cycling, and maybe some of them are shared between different groups, but they don't necessarily all share the same needs or requirements for the sort of cycling infrastructure. So perhaps there are different requirements for deaf and blind cyclists, different cultural perceptions, or even different ways that we might like to engage with cycling, say owning a bike versus a bike share scheme. And perhaps if we start with Hayley, I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about how we're able to make that leap from understanding the barriers to understanding the needs and requirements of all these different groups that we might want to be encouraging to cycle.
As I said, that's kind of something that we're kind of looking at more at the moment and looking at case studies of kind of how that is being done at the moment. And I think it was raised in some of the questions about different minority groups and how we can improve or change perceptions around cycling. And I think one of the key things was community outreach. I think programs are generally more successful when they incorporate members of the community to kind of do or to try and start cycling together. It's then not just kind of you're doing it and everyone's thinking that or has these negative perceptions. It's then a community activity which people can get together and do, obviously for all of the health benefits. Sorry, what was the rest of the question? Just the solutions.
Yeah, I guess how we get to we might have lots of different solutions needed, and how we achieve that.
I think it is just looking at the different groups, and I think while they do have different barriers, I think a lot of them are kind of common and they relate to kind of providing infrastructure, building confidence, and getting comfortable with the idea of cycling or kind of increasing the appeal of it. So I think there are definitely overlaps, and I don't think we need to treat everything completely siloed and as a separate item to kind of be addressed.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from yourself, Mohammed?
I think one of the most important things we've found is actual community engagement work, actually working with the communities in their own spaces, rather than, because sometimes people bring them out, but actually going into those communities, learning about them, working with them, and that's where it's been most successful and also sustainable.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about we're sort of remembering to go into and meet with communities rather than, like you say, bring into a central space. And Patrick. Not sure if maybe Patrick's.
Yes, thank you. I've been unmuted now. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I agree with that. I think I have a great privilege in being able to be involved with within the community in this BME cycling group. Yeah.
Excellent. So one of the other topics of question that's come in, also particularly around the potential diversity within the communities being reached within Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, and questions, for example, about intersectionality, perhaps disabled members of those communities, or even as well the differences between second, third generation members. How well do we think that we're currently understanding that and building that into our work around making cycling more inclusive? Perhaps to change the order, if I go to Mohammed first.
Can you just say that again, last bit again?
About the question?
Yeah, please. Sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, sorry, of course. Yeah, so I'm wondering about issues around maybe intersectionality and differences between first, second, multiple generation members of the community.
There are I know we've found in some of the work that we've been doing is how do we engage older generation, but also younger generation more inclined. But also there's a push at the moment with a lot of charity walks as well, for a lot of people doing that. But also one of the things we're looking at is how do you get older people, the sort of first generation out, but also identifying accessible routes. So where they have got no sort of styles and things which they have to go over. So using some of the national parks and countryside areas have miles without styles. So that way we can encourage the older population to engage. But also sort of looking at disability. Somebody mentioned a question around, Sarah mentioned about disability, and again is exactly the same sort of point, but how do we engage with those communities to access accessible areas? We also find with some communities issues around cleanliness and hygiene, and access to facilities and where they stay and food and so on. So those sort of things need to be addressed and looked at as well. And for example, the other one we've looked at is parents with very young children using pushchairs and prams, and how do we get them out into nature as well?
Yeah, I mean, as we think about it, the diversity within our community is expanding. Patrick, any comments to add?
I think it's very much learning as we go. With the cycling, that there are so many issues that come up, and we're just resolving them as we go. You know, I think the club has done tremendously well in that. You know, at the beginning it was sort of trips around the Ashton Canal and Salford Quays, and then they started branching out, and it's Southport and Liverpool, you know, train ride, and then a cycle around those areas. So we're learning as we go, but there are a lot of cultural barriers and issues. That's right. Thank you.
And Hadley, just to come to you as well.
I don't think I've got anything significant to add. I'm aware of time, but yeah, I think there is definitely a limited amount of existing kind of information and research into kind of different ethnic groups and cycling or travel in general. And I think that's definitely something that people are starting to consider more. I think it's generally focused more on male-female divides and things like that, but there's more research going on at the moment, I think, and that should hopefully help kind of identify more specific solutions and how they can be engaged with further in future. Thank
you. Yeah, I mean, we're certainly gradually learning more about the complexity of the inequalities that are there in terms of access and becoming cyclists. We had lots and lots of questions. There were also people raising questions about the kind of economics of this, maybe funding schemes, but also working patterns, shift patterns, how they might impact on people's ability to engage with cycling, as well as connections between leisure and work or utility cycling, and the way that people might engage with those different types of cycling, and some really interesting questions and comments about the way we tell the history and the messaging that we might have around some of our around access to some of our national parks, for example, particularly, for example, telling the stories of Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities in national parks, and maybe the role for art, TV and media, those sorts of representational forms that might help us to think about the importance of messaging and history in all of these things to do with diversity, access and inequalities. So some really, really interesting comments. I'm conscious of time, so I'll pause it there, but I will be taking a download of the chat box, and we're writing up notes and recording the session. I'll hand back to Luke then, just to say a few words, I think.
Thanks for Sam. Thanks for that, Sam. I appreciate it. That was interesting. It's a shame we don't have more time to delve into some of those questions. But what I will do, if we're downloading the questions that have come through in the chat box, is that we might pick out a few, because for anyone who knows our seminar series, you know that We write up a bit of a seminar report, which we send out, that gives a bit of an overview of the speakers' presentations and delves into a little bit about the issues that come up during the Q&As. So what I might do is take some of these questions that seem quite pertinent to the discussion, and if the speakers are able to do so, I might just fire a few over via email that they might be able to answer, just with a couple of sentences here and there, which we can put into the seminar report and then send out to everybody, just so we keep this discussion going and we keep the conversation moving in both directions, because I think it's very important. I'm sorry that we've run over time. It's very important to finish on time. This is our first webinar, so I hope you will forgive us for that. I'd just like to say thank you for everyone that's come to listen to our speakers, and a very special thank you to our 3 speakers, Patrick, Hayley and Mohammed, who've given up their time today to talk about some very interesting projects that they're involved with. There's such a sad part of webinars is that you can't hear the audience applauding, but I'm sure that if we were in our usual venue right now, we'd be able to get a big round of applause for our speakers. So at the very least, we can offer a virtual round of applause now. Thank you very much. And we will be doing another webinar. However, unfortunately, we haven't been able to announce the date of it yet. If you stay in touch with us, either through our seminar report that we'll send out next week, or follow us on Twitter, or keep up to date with our website, and we will be putting the information of our next webinar up. They are usually bi-monthly, so it'll probably be, you know, in the next one to 2 months, we'll be hopefully organising another one. Until then, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Please stay safe, and thank you all for joining us today. And hopefully we'll be in touch soon.